Welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast with me, Sam Webster Harris. Today, diving into the topic of unlearning our behaviours. When you have breakfast in the morning, you might wolf it down chased by a pint of instant coffee, or perhaps mindfully consider each bite that you take whilst you peacefully sip an espresso. Some of us might swallow a colourful set of vitamins and supplements. Many of us are on necessary medication, whilst others unnecessarily medicate. There are a few of us who greet the day with just a simple glass of water. But in this episode, I'm not here to talk about who is right and who is wrong in their morning consumption routines. I am here to consider the building blocks of who we are. Psychoactive drugs like caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, etc. will directly alter your thinking patterns, your moods, and decisions. The pharmacological agents like medicines and vitamins, they affect your body's ability to operate, to maintain bone and muscle and nerve health. They impact your performance capabilities, and this, in turn, affects your thinking patterns, your moods, and your decisions. Let's say you don't have blood pressure management, then you can't safely endure physical or emotional stress. Then you have things like fats and carbohydrates in your food. They give you energy. This allows you to take on the day, and it affects your hormones that influence your priorities. Again, this all in turn affects your thinking patterns, moods, and decisions. Then finally, you have proteins and fats and essential elements that act as the building blocks of who you are, constructing your muscle, your bones, nerves, and even the brain cells in which your consciousness domiciles. These all affect your capabilities like strength, mobility, and clarity of thought. And again, these things all directly impact your thinking patterns, your moods, and your decisions. Whether you struggle to get out of a chair or remember the day of the week, it's a very different set of decisions you'll be able to make for your life compared to being able to lift twice your body weight and remember a grocery list. And so we find that our behaviours, which are the constituents of our personality, these are all directly controlled from several different layers, just on a chemical composition basis. Each layer is acting on a different time basis, from the very short term, like caffeine, etc., to the very long term, like the building blocks of our bones. And the reason I've been saying all this is that it is exactly the same with our memories. The things that we learn that make us take different decisions and pathways of behaving. From an inspiring chat 5 minutes ago, or maybe your favorite music that gives you some confidence and energy, to things like the patterns of love and attachment that were etched into your memory as a toddler. Though the specific moments are long forgotten, the lessons are stored in your subconscious, seemingly as deeply a part of us as our very bones. And so that's all leading up to the concept of talking about unlearning our behaviours. As children, we learn so many things deeply within us. It's a lesson that's stored in a vault so deep even that we wouldn't know how to access it to perhaps change the lesson. But I do believe we can unlearn any behaviour. I mean, hey, it's the Growth Mindset Podcast. As children, we are just trying to get by in the world and to please people. And you might not think that's what we're doing, but ultimately, it is transactional to the level of wanting to be part of a group. And we develop this naive sense of what's important. We then spend our entire adult lives trying to unlearn as many of the things as we can and bring back some of the curiosity and open-mindedness that came so naturally to us when we were younger. A personal aggravation for me is the British accent, albeit the bad version of the British accent. I saw a video the other day of a kitten trying to learn British. Each word had a lot of the letter T in it, like Betty Botter Bit Butter. But of course, British people can't pronounce their letters. That's British people can't pronounce their letters for people who don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, in the video, the poor kitten actually ends up having a panic attack at the point where the person says bottle of water, and I sent this video to my girlfriend, who then confessed to me she often feels like the said overwhelmed kitten in the video whilst talking to me. And it just made me realize how stupid it was that I just ignored my teachers when I was young. Because as a child, your teachers will try to get you to pronounce your words properly. And yet, kids will run around talking in slang, they're trying to be cool, they're trying to fit in. And the social drive is much more important, ultimately, than what your teacher says. Yet here I am now, spending my adulthood trying to speak properly so that people can simply understand me, like anybody that wants to listen to me talking on a podcast or my girlfriend. And yes, I do make a lot of effort now, and there's a huge improvement, especially for any of my European friends who definitely used to suffer. And it has definitely been worth me making that effort. This example may have sounded dumb to you, but it really does represent something incredibly prevalent. A few episodes ago on the show, I was talking about attachment styles, which is something that many people struggle with and want to improve. Being able to balance our emotions and create a healthy level between independence and interdependence whilst not craving closeness, yet also not being overwhelmed by it, is hard. And in fact, it's very similar with boundaries that I also spoke about recently. And when we look at both of these things, it's crazy how much of this is from our upbringing, whilst it's still here showing up in the rest of our habits. Whether we are willing to follow our dreams or conform to expectations, whether we have the confidence to change career or take on real adventures, or if we wait obediently for permission. Whether we willingly push ourselves out of our comfort zones or if we fear doing it, or perhaps even we violently reject comfort using destructive behaviours. Those are all patterns that can stem back to our attachment behaviours and our general feeling of safety. So whether you want to improve your relationships or to push your comfort zones or just stop sabotaging your potential, these are all behaviours that we learned socially, probably as children, that we now spend the rest of our lives trying to unlearn. And then there are some other issues that seem to be drilled into us, like the classic problem of learning to conform to rigid ideas and stop questioning things. And this is because not challenging the status quo is a wise strategy for being accepted and staying alive in prehistoric times. If you abandon your tribe, you die. If you eat the mushroom that they tell you not to eat, you die. And that means we are designed to become rigid and learn what is possible and what can't be done for our very own safety. But it's an overfitting problem. The saying that they call you crazy until they call you a genius is a perfect example. Only radical ideas and change can come from rejecting what is known and what is accepted. But then that might give you the idea that you need to take massive action to take control, when I think in many cases it's much more subtle. As James Clear constantly promotes in the idea of atomic habits, that it's the micro actions that build our life, like me week in, week out, putting a bit more effort into pronouncing the letter T in my words. And of course, in life, if you have a growth mindset, you will notice that actions compound. In fact, there are only a few very big life decisions that really impact your life, like who you marry, where you live, what your work is. And most other life-changing things are just a series of very small decisions adding up. Let's say you start a blog. It's not a big thing. Each article that you write will increase your experience in that topic and in writing and in getting feedback. If you write week in, week out, over years, that's a life-changing step from being someone who wants to write more to being an author of thousands of posts who knows what works, they know how to tell a story, they know how to build an audience. They will have become someone who is an expert in their topic and could write a book or even several in that area. Now, writing one blog or one article will not change your life, but writing one article a week over 10 years will. If we consider this and the art of unlearning our lessons of how and who to be, this analogy works perfectly, as you'll see in a second. We have this current idea of what we should do and how we have to do it for basically everything. We'll dig into that in a second. One of the benefits of using time, effort, and repeated feedback from the growth mindset is that it can help us unlearn this. It's even better if we don't have expectations and go in with an open mind. Tim Urban is probably my favorite writer ever. He started his blog as an act of procrastination. It was just some of his random brain farts of stuff that fascinated him without any expectations for it. If you've read anything by Tim Urban, you'll know he has this amazing talent for speaking with a childish curiosity about extremely deep topics, yet filling it with hilarious perspectives supplemented with just the dumbest cartoons that you've ever seen and an enticing narrative. When reflecting on his writing, he said that if he'd started writing with the intention of being a writer, he'd have written how he expected you need to write. He thought that if he wanted writing to be a job, he'd have to write normally because that's what writers do. But because he had no expectations, it was just a fun side thing where he wrote in a way that just helped him ponder deep questions and laugh about it all. Yet, over the years of writing week in and week out, he understood what people really responded to, and he accidentally built the biggest blog on the internet at the time, and with a completely unique writing style that you couldn't have learned from anyone else. This leads into another really fascinating lesson from the world of writing that has profound insights for the psychology of unlearning behaviours. And this is that every story has a villain. When we are unlearning behaviours, it can be very satisfying to hear that our past or society has caused our current behaviour, whether it's the incentives misalignment of modern education, teaching us to accept and memorise facts instead of how to question things and learn how to learn, or perhaps it's our parents for the attachment style they gave us, or maybe capitalism for the way we rushed into a job and worry about money. However, the plot twist in this story is that the villain isn't all these past traumas or these current scenarios. In fact, the only thing that makes us do any behaviour right here, right now, is ourselves. The villain is the expectations in our heads. Every expectation we have of what we should and shouldn't do is from our very own thinking. And now, a ridiculous but technically true example is that you genuinely don't even need to pay your taxes. And I mean that you literally don't have to pay tax at a fundamental level. It isn't a law of physics. Now, of course, this is not advice to stop paying your tax. If you want to earn money and reside in a given country legally, then yes, you absolutely need to pay your taxes, and I recommend that you do. But it's a trade that you are opting into. It is your decision. There are only 3 laws of Newtonian mechanics, which explain the fundamental movement of matter in the universe, and there is no additional 4th law stating that you will perform the necessary movements to pay your taxes. That law does not exist. The point here is that whatever behaviour you are doing is in your control here today, and they can be shaken up and changed. If you seek to blame your past or your circumstances, it will only make it impossible to fight the real villain in your head of the expectations of what you have to do. Alrighty, we have done the first half of the episode covering some of the more expansive ideas that I really enjoy. And in the second half of the episode, we will do some more converging and review 5 concepts from psychology and philosophy to help us unlearn behaviours and rewrite our scripts. Coming up after the break. So a quick recap. Human beings are not born with personalities, we are born with potential. What we become is largely a consequence of repeated decisions, environmental conditioning, and our cultural scripts. Over time, this of course culminates in what we refer to as habits, but these patterns may be helpful and they may be harmful. What they certainly aren't is neutral. So your innate actions, your fears, those weird voices in your head telling you to wait for permission, they are inherited. Just as financial debt can accrue interest and will shape your future possibilities, a behavioural debt can strain our autonomy. So now we're going to go into 5 ideas from psychology and philosophy to help us start building some more autonomy and ways to drive personal change. First is a concept called path dependence and the trap of continuity. If we look at economic history, path dependence explains why societies cling to outdated technologies, for example, the QWERTY keyboard or the imperial system of measuring things, fossil fuels. These all have continued use long after superior alternatives have emerged, not because there's something great about them, but because we're already invested in them. And it takes an act of policy change to push us out of these ingrained systems. cities banning fossil fuel cars, etc. Now, the reason I'm explaining this is that human behavior operates on the same principle. If you grew up rewarded for being agreeable, you may then struggle to assert yourself, even when your adult life needs it. And that's because you have behavioural inertia. Let's take someone called Laura. She is a high-achieving lawyer, but she's realized she has a chronic allergy to saying no to people. Her people-pleasing nature came from being a straight-A student who was rewarded for obedience, but 30 years later, she's now drowning in work, she has no idea how to draw boundaries, and her brain is still trying to impress Mrs. Thompson back from her year 5. So her need for approval has become her path, and that's not been set by reason, but by momentum. But the solution isn't that dramatic. The act of learning to decline politely became revolutionary for her. It basically consisted of setting a policy of reviewing her own needs first before automatically saying yes, and that transformed her life. It didn't require therapy, just courage repeated daily. Now, there are many forms that you can create path dependence in your life, and they can often build us into a corner, and the solution can be creating your own policies to help you break out of them. The example I've given was social pressure, and that one is certainly a big one for people. And if you are interested in that area, I did do a whole episode called Social Pressure Personality Disorder on the topic, and I'll link to it in the show notes because I thought it was a really fun episode. Now, the second concept from psychology is self-schema theory, and that's essentially the idea that we become the stories we tell ourselves. A human constructs their identity by telling themselves stories. These self-schemas, that they're called, filter our reality, a bit like having a label that you stuck onto your forehead and then people just treat you like that. Concepts such as, I'm bad with money, or I'm not a creative person. Perhaps a child who believes they are clumsy grows into an adult who avoids physical activity, not because they can't do physical activity, but because they believe they can't. Now, psychologically, self-schemas are really sticky. They act as cognitive biases, they reinforce themselves, and they really do control your life. But to change your life, you don't necessarily need more discipline. You need a new narrative. Stephen Pressfield had a great book called The War of Art, and he describes his own personal transformation by using a simple phrase. He says, I turned pro. He didn't wait for permission or proof to become a good writer. The universe didn't bow down to him and grant him special writerly powers to become an author. He just began acting as if he were a professional writer. And then slowly the reality gradually adjusted to fit his new script. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of showing up to become skilled as a writer. But if you decide to show up regularly and take it seriously as if it was your professional job, the habit creates the reality over time. Next, we're moving into neuroplasticity and an idea called Hebb's law for rewiring brain connections. A lot of the analogies about the brain being like a computer can give us some false impressions because it's not like a machine, it's more like a garden. Neurons that fire together wire together, as they say, and this means repeated actions become neurological default pathways. And the more we use a route, the more it becomes like a default highway that we just always take that route because it's the easy one for us to take. But that doesn't mean that we can't plan new routes. You don't have to necessarily erase old habits. You just need to grow new ones that eventually overtake them and become used more often. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, illustrates this with a story of a man who wanted to floss. And he didn't say, I'm going to start flossing like a dental ninja. Instead, he committed to flossing one single tooth per day, which is so trivial, it's kind of stupid. But it was impossible for him to fail. So in creating something so low friction as a starting point, he was able to start laying down neural tracks, and soon the habit grew beyond the initial commitment, and he became someone that flosses his teeth. Maybe even a teeth flossing ninja, but who knows? The point is, consistency rewires identity, and it's much better to start small, and that means whether you want to become a runner, change career, or maybe start sleeping earlier, there are small things that you can do to get there and build that pathway slowly over time. Let's say you have a bunch of bad habits around sleep, and instead of trying to clear all of them together in one go and start going to bed 5 hours earlier, it might be better to just pick one thing. Maybe you have a late night snack that you shouldn't be having, or perhaps you're on your phone too much and you could turn your phone on to airplane mode at 10 p.m. and let yourself do whatever else you normally do, and that doesn't matter, but at least you stop doing one little thing. And slowly you can work on turning your TV off earlier and maybe reading or even journaling. Who knows? But the important thing is to start by doing one thing that you definitely can do. And now on the topic of writing to yourself, next we have good old Friedrich Nietzsche, who once wrote, "Become who you are." And he didn't mean self-discovery through addition, more labels, more goals. He meant the opposite, liberation through subtraction. And the reason he wrote this was that most of us are basically walking piles of other people's expectations. So many, in fact, that we don't even know who the real us is. But that person is there, lying under the rubble of culture, rules, school uniforms, and childhood survival instincts. Much of what you might even consider yourself is mimicry. We model behaviour from parents, peers, systems, and unlearning is the process of deconstructing that scaffolding. You often see this from Westerners who go to the East to become monks for a while. After years of meditation, they realize that spiritual progress isn't about becoming enlightened so much as it is about shedding all that was not essential. The wisdom wasn't added as much as it was revealed what was already there. There's also a great quote from Michelangelo, who was asked how he turned a marble block into the statue of David. And he said it was simple. I remove everything that is not David. I think being an adult in this world and forming your own identity is exactly that. You don't grow into a better version of yourself by adding more things. You peel back all these layers that reveals inside something much more original and true to yourself. And finally, we have the fresh start effect, or psychological rebirth. So a funny thing about us humans and how weird we are is we wait for January the 1st to start jogging, or maybe our birthday to quit smoking, or maybe finally after a breakup we'll begin our diet. And behavioural scientists call this the fresh start effect. But of course, it's not the calendar that changes us. It's just the symbolic severance from the past. And our brain basically loves a really good line in the sand. The problem with this is that we can often delay things until something happens. But the good thing is you can actually hack this effect. You can create your own rituals of rebirth. You can move your desk, burn an old journal, start a new calendar. You can choose to start your calendar on a random Tuesday because no one's stopping you. In fact, there's no reason that every day can't be an opportunity for a chance at a new you. Dave Brailsford used this principle with the British cycling team. He believed that improving by 1% across dozens of small behaviours would, over time, redefine the entire system. So they looked at everything. The tiny things like seat comfort, sleep hygiene, hand washing habits. And over a few years, his team came to dominate the sport. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is your brain responds to micro incentives. The change doesn't need to be a dramatic, huge one where you go vegan and start doing yoga at 6 a.m. and journaling. It's better to be consistent. Rebirth actually isn't something that happens overnight, and you don't just become a different person like that when the clock strikes midnight. In fact, you just need to become 1% less of your old self every day and be experiencing these micro rebirths every single moment that add up to a whole rebirth over a year. And I think that's a really cool and sustainable goal to try and aim for. Okay, now putting this all together, we've been talking about behavioural debt and these 5 different ideas. And we see that unlearning is about liquidity, the ability to move, adapt, act without constraint. Your default patterns can be redirected. Your self-schema or labels can be rewritten. Your brain can even be rewired. Your baggage can be left behind by subtracting what isn't you, and your story can begin again, any day and every day. It is entirely your choice. Essentially, behavioural debt is sneaky. It compounds, but you can pay it off in micro payments. One breath, one decision, one small act of defiance, one ridiculously low-stakes action. These little things add up, and you don't have to take them all on at the same time. You don't need a whole new brain to stop being your old self. You only need awareness of one small action that you can take and be willing to keep pushing yourself without worrying about failure or worrying about what other people will think. Failure, of course, isn't an issue. Giving up is. So whatever you do going forwards, remember that your actions are in your control. I'm not saying that it's easy to change them, but it is possible for you to change them. Now, if you enjoyed what I've spoken about, please let me know what you think. It's been a shorter experimental review of some ideas that I basically just had this week from different things that I've been working on or consuming. And I've been listening to a few writing podcasts, as you may have worked out. And of course, I've been writing on attachment and boundaries. And interestingly, I started this episode with just a bunch of notes I didn't think were even that related. And I ended up with a thing that I feel has felt like it planned to all be together. And then please, if this episode helped you, do share it with a friend. It is how the show grows. And thank you so much for all of you who have been sharing the show. Over the last year on Spotify, our audience has grown by an incredible 500%, which is nuts. So thank you so much for everyone who has been sharing. It's been hugely useful. And then I'm always open to feedback. So any suggestions or questions, please whack it in the comments on Spotify or YouTube. And a good rating is so meaningful for me. I can't even say how helpful that is. So please be nice to me today if you can. And remember that life is super short and to be enjoyed. So don't go around putting off happiness or letting your behaviors get in the way. Be kind to yourself. And whilst you're at it, be kind to someone else too. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
Studies show we need time for information to sink in, so I'm going to give you a 5-second pause, silence, to reflect on one idea from the show before you jump back into your busy life. Ready and go.